Hello everyone and welcome to the cinematic workshop using Unreal Engine 4. My name is Erasmus Brosdau and I'm the founder, CEO and director of Black Ember Digital, a multimedia company located in Germany. We specialize in high quality video games and cinematics, all using real-time technology. We are represented in Japan by SAFEHOUSE, a CG and VFX studio with whom we work closely together on multiple projects. In the past, we worked for multiple clients and shows including Netflix, Kojima Productions, NHK, the Tokyo Game Show, Biohazard, Kamen Rider, and many more. Besides that, we also like to work on internal demos to develop our own IPs and to push the boundaries of what's possible with real-time rendering. One of them is called Zenobia, and I would like to use this project to demonstrate the amazing features and benefits of Unreal Engine, which we will be using to create one of our cinematics. So without further ado, let's take a look at the actual cinematic we made in 2020 and then go over the main points we will be discussing in this video.
What's it like in the dream?
It's like being underwater, a completely different world. One that you don't really feel a part of, like you can't ever be a part of. Your perception and senses, it's more like feeling and meaning than anything else.
Sorry you have to go through all of this.
Don't be.
But tomorrow...
It'll work. It worked once. It'll work again.
I just worry about the what ifs.
Aw, big sister's worried.
Well, of course I am. What if you can't get out this time?
Don't think about it. I don't. Just focus on the mission. That's all that matters.
Focus on the mission. Yes, ma'am. All right, get up. We need to get going.
So when we first started the cinematic, it obviously all starts with an idea. And this IP called Zenobia we had for quite a while already, and I knew the overall storyline and I knew the characters and quite a bit of everything. But we wanted to make a small teaser to show our characters and the kind of some cool environments and just to make people interested in this project. So as we are having in this project basically two worlds, like this real world and this other thing called the Dreamworld, I wanted to show a little bit the contrast of these both worlds. And if you remember from the cinematic you saw, it was clear separation of these more reddish tones and the very bluish tones here in this underwater base. And our idea was, let's just make a little cinematic of showing our two main characters. These are these two half-sisters called Zoe and Luna. And at this point, Zoe has been traveling to this dream world with we don't say how, and Luna has not. And she's basically she wants to know how it is to be in this dream world, as it's a surreal place, like a horror world, and it's not really existing. It's like a dream, it's like a dream that you know that you're dreaming and you can walk around there and do stuff. So this thing here is basically meant for not really giving answers or anything. It's basically a teaser to make people interested and to show a little bit of our environment. And of course, it all starts with this idea, and then you start with this script. And the script was very quickly done, basically. It's only 2 pages, and I didn't make much descriptions, as basically we all in the team knew kind of what we were doing, so I spared the things of describing the environments and so on. So you can see here Zenobia Two Sisters, that was the original name back then, and interior of the astrocyte, and the astrocyte is this underwater base. It's called the astrocyte. And then we basically have all the text, here what it's like in the dream, and then comes all the text that you saw or heard in the cinematic, and then it just goes on a little bit. They both love, all right, we gotta get up, we need to get going. The 2 sisters stand up and disappear from view, and that's it. That's the entire script. With this thing being completed, I knew already quite exactly how this thing should be looking like. So at this point, we didn't had these nice character models done, but we went directly to go shoot the motion capture. So I have some friends here in Germany called Metric Minds, and they provide motion capture. And so we sat together and we hired 2 actresses and basically gave them the script and started the entire motion capture shooting. And I also have a couple of videos for this to show. And so you see here, basically it's a kind of reference camera for the actual motion capture process. And you see we have our 2 actresses, and we put them here on this mat thingies. And as you can see, they have quite some big headsets on their head, and they have cameras in front of the faces, and these cameras are capturing or recording their faces permanently all the time. But as I think this headset uses quite a bigger battery pack, we put them on this mat so that we have a tiny gap here where this actress can basically put the battery inside. As if you shoot motion capture, it's sometimes a bit complicated to lay your actors completely flat on the ground, especially when they have these headsets on. But that was the basic layout, and they basically start acting now and doing the performance. So we capture at this point the body and the face at the same time. Also the audio, but we knew that these these actresses are not going to be the final voice actresses. So we record the voices for being able to know where we are kind of right now in time. But later for the final thing, we have booked other voice actresses that were kind of re-recording the audio, and it got replaced in the edit. We also have this done from another camera. So here you could see another angle of how the entire thing looks. So I'm the dude here on the left side looking at the script, and some technicians and some other people here at the back that are recording the motion capture process. A couple of screens where you can see how the bones of these actors are getting recorded from the 3D models. And if you're unfamiliar with motion capture, these cameras here at the ceiling, there are way more of them, and they go pretty much 360 degrees around the entire space here. They are basically capturing these reflective markers that these actors are having on their suit. So, and these markers will drive the bones of the extra 3D model, and usually you can see this on one of these screens here. But as we didn't have the extra 3D model, as I said, we basically we're shooting this kind of blindly. So I basically had everything in my head here. We're looking at the script and basically giving directions what these actresses should be doing with the pronunciation of the words, how much pause there should be, what are they doing with their fingers, how are they lying on the ground, when do they smile, when do they laugh, and things like this. So we did a couple of takes. I think it only took 4 or 5 different takes, and then we basically had this thing done. So that was fairly simple to do, but as you can see, already quite a bit of a complicated setup. And for the face, I also have some video for this one. Right? And you can see how this looks from the face helmet. So you see that this actress is moving here quite a bit around in the hall, but we always see her face from the front. And this allows us to exactly see what kind of performance she's doing for her acting. And our job afterwards will be to completely do the facial animation for this particular character. So, and one thing that I can already tell everyone as a trick or as a tip, when you shoot things like this, anything with video, always make sure that you know the lights, what kind of hertz the lights, like the artificial lights in this space that you're shooting are having. As we once made a version where we were capturing the video at 50 frames per second, but the lamps in the hall were having 60 hertz. And as a result, you get a flickering video. It's not the end of the world, but it's these little things that make your production a little bit smoother when you shoot your reference footage, or in this case, this was absolutely important that we have this one. And if it starts flickering, it starts to be a bit annoying for the animators later on. But technically, this is all the footage that we need for recreating facial animation. So, and with this motion capture process done, we basically took all the data and applied them to our character models, which we then created later at after the motion capture shooting. For the environment that we see here, as I said, I don't want to go in depth talking about how you produce assets, as this would be multiple workshops on its own, basically, especially for the characters. It gets quite complicated and very complex very quickly. But what I want to show you is just a little bit on the idea behind it and what kind of workflow we chose for making this thing quite fast. So this scene, we're also going to talk about the Dreamworld in a moment. But this scene, this underwater base, was mainly done with all our assets being self-made. But for the outside, for like the underwater environment, we also used things from the marketplace. So we knew we didn't want to spend much time modeling little fish swimming around and some seaweed and all of this. So when you use Unreal Engine, there's a great marketplace where you can find lots of assets, some of them even for free. For example, mega scans, which are already used throughout the entire industry. And you can download them for free, or you find other assets for a fair price. And you can easily download and import them into your project. And then you can just drag and drop these assets into your scene. And so this underwater setting was very quickly done, basically. I just adjusted a couple of things here to make it fit how I wanted it. And the rest was kind of done by our own team. And when I zoom out here a little bit, you can really see that it was only really that much done that you really see. So there was not much need to continue working on this or to make this somehow connect to the ground, as this will never be seen. So also you can see that we have this thing here quite a bit bigger, as you think it is from the video. And this is because of the concept art I did at the start. So when we were discussing the look of this underwater base, I also painted a couple of concepts. And one of them was this one here. So, and you see it matches quite well already. Like our one's a bit darker right now, but I knew I wanted to have this circular area where the two sisters could be basically lying on the ground and enjoying the view, kind of as, as if you were looking at one of these sea life shows or whatever. So also you see a lot of metal plates and more sci-fi looking elements here, like these pipes and insets and whatnot. And they're all colored in this blue and green tones. And so this concept was giving in a first idea of how this should be looking like. Also the caustics on the ground that you see here. So I tried to paint this in here as well. Additionally, I painted another concept, and this was this thingy here. And this is basically when you turn the camera like 90 degrees around. So a bigger mechanism, bigger sci-fi machine. It looks like more ceiling lights and whatnot. It's quite brightly lit. And it turned out, we really don't need it. So we didn't spend too much time on putting the focus on this at all. So I knew this thing was going to look like this, but in the end, we just made the very rough essentials for this in the space. As we also, I painted another concept for this machine. And this thing is the actual machine these characters can go into and traverse or travel into this dream world. So it's like, looks like something from the Matrix or so, right? Like something you could sit in and then transfer yourself into this kind of dream world. So this area where the two sisters are, this is actually a kind of a sci-fi laboratory where they would be able to travel to this dream world. That's why they're basically here. So we have this concept, and then we're starting the first models. And as you can see here is this entire thing that you saw from the concept. Just if I just go for this unlit mode here, you can see a little bit better. So we have something in place here. Here, this would be the area where this machine would be standing, but we didn't spend any work on this at all. So, and if I go back to the lit mode, you see here, now we have a couple of screens and the lights, but yeah, nothing really is going on here as everything focuses on this front area. So, and in general, when you look at a couple of these assets, we used a decal-based workflow, meaning that all these assets, they are not having unique textures, but when you open one of these assets up, they are all made by using little floating geometry things that I put on top of these assets, which have normal maps and other elements painted on top of them, which create a more detailed look. And if you look here at the wireframe, you see that we have these little square things here as extra geometry onto this asset. And on these little polygons, we are basically displaying a new material. And this is this material here. And this material is what is called an atlas. And an atlas allows you to basically, can open the texture here, to basically pick anything from this texture. So if you want this screw, for example, it's like you cut out this screw and basically glue it on top of this asset. So instead of modeling an actual screw with geometry on top of these things, it's just this cutout of a texture, and this is called a decal. So, and this atlas obviously gives you a lot of these decals. So you could cut out this thing and all of these other, like these little vents here and whatnot, and you cut them out and basically plaster them on your object. So you can see here we have another one of these little air inlets or whatever this is, and we have even another atlas which is called which we're using for the logos. So here's the logo atlas. When you look at this texture, you can see here we have a variety of logos that are all on one texture, and again you just cut it out and basically glue it on the object. So here we have a lot of things like push and press and danger and caution and all the typical sci-fi elements that you need, warning stripes and whatnot. So we just cut them out, and you can see them here on this asset. They are pretty much used throughout now. And as a result, we only need a handful of textures, and nothing has been made uniquely, meaning we are able to always reuse these little decals and signs on all other assets. And if we had painted this caution sign, for example, directly on this asset, specifically only for this asset, then we couldn't use it on some other asset, and this other one would also need a unique texture and so on. And additionally, we are using tiling materials, which, for example, means here this is just a flat white material that is basically wrapped around this object. So when I open this material here and I just change the color here to something like that, you see it already changing here directly in the scene, you know. And this is a very powerful workflow. So basically every second of the cinematic we have control of changing materials, colors and whatnot. And it's very, very fast to create multiple assets in this way. It takes a while in the original setup because you need to create this atlas textures first. And this is a bit time consuming, but once you have them, your output of assets will be quite fast. You know, you can, as I said, it's all about reusing elements. The character models were quite complex and kind of difficult to achieve. I had a lot of experience already modeling characters, but for this quality in real time, we definitely had to push many areas to make it even better. So the original head was based on a scan that we bought and then was modified quite a bit in order to get this fidelity and especially the look that I wanted for Luna to have. So, but you can see all the details that we have here in the hair and the eyebrows and the pore levels, also the translucency in the face. There's a lot of details going on. And same with the suit. The suit is a bit simpler, you could say. But once we had one of these suits, it was also, of course, used for the other sister, so they're basically using pretty much the same body. They also have exactly the same height. So they're using exactly the same bone structure, the same facial setup, and we try to share as many assets and data as possible. So, and the actual animation itself, you can see I can scrub through here through the timeline already, and you see that Luna is talking and moving her mouth. This is done using blend shapes, and for this one we have here in Maya, for example, this is Luna's head as it looks in Maya, and you can also see the amount of polygons that this character has. So it's quite a bit of polygons, but not over the top, completely crazy or something like this. And in this scene we only have the head, and you can see here the kind of rig that we made for the overall body. So it's very common that the head and the body are two separate elements. Basically, we treat the head as its own unique character, just as the body. And later in the engine, we merge them kind of together in Unreal Engine. So all of these facial expressions need to be modeled. And once we were done with it, we were able to basically blend from the neutral expression to any other expressions using these blend shapes. And you can see once I drag one of these sliders, you see that it blends to a certain different facial expression. And some elements are doing a bit more to the face and some are doing a bit less. So here you see that just the nose is slightly deforming. Here a bit of the mouth angle is rising. Of course, it's also always done for the other side. So here you have this kind of a bit of the eyelid squint. Yeah, many of these ones, they all needed to be modeled by hand, as I said, and it takes quite a while to figure out the right amount of modeling, how much you need, how much of the information. It's usually recommended to also make this with scans, but we didn't have this. So yeah, we were just basically trying to use our artistic eye to make it look somewhat nice. All in all, I think we had like 50, 60 blend shapes that we're using here for being able to animate her. And with the facial animation video, like from the GoPro that this actress had in front of the face, we used a special software that we need to that we're using to analyze the face from the actress, and then we have an algorithm basically controlling what the real actress is doing. It will be transferred of animating our blend shapes here. So all of these blend shapes will pretty much get animated at the same time. Some of them only to like very tiny amount, others maybe to 100% amount, whatever this animation requires. And this usually gives us a really good base to start, and then we polish the animation manually by keyframing, like by hand going in and refining the animation and make it look more realistic. And the other rest of the motion capture was applied to the skeleton so that the characters are moving and doing their performance basically. So let's look at the actual cinematic, and for that we are of course using Unreal Engine's sequencer. And I have docked this here in the lower window, and you can of course also get this out and put it on a different screen. Basically, that's what I usually do. But for the purpose of this video, I just have this here one-on-one. So I usually need to make the viewport a little bit smaller. But I basically, here in the sequencer, I just want to go over the very, very basic elements of how you make a cinematic. And technically, it's super simple. You just create a level sequence, give it a name, and once you have the sequence open, you can basically select any object that you want to animate and just add it to the sequencer. And now it works like in any other software like Maya or Blender or anything. You just push S for doing a keyframe, then you move in time forward and put the object somewhere else. You can do whatever you want with it, make another keyframe, and you have like an interpolation between these two keys and something gets animated. And you can press space, of course, to press play, and then you basically see what's happening. And can shift around the keys, and then of course the animation is happening faster. And by default, Unreal Engine gives you only the transform keys, meaning I can now animate the location, rotation, and the scale of this object. But it doesn't stop there. We have basically access to everything this object has to offer. And also, when you see on the right side here, this object has a lot of different materials. It has different parameters for collision and physics, and something for lighting. Should it cast a shadow or not? Things like this. We can all animate in the sequencer. So we can just simply go add track and then add a couple of other useful things. But we can add the static mesh component. And with this component, we have the options now to add tracks specifically for this 3D mesh. And when you open this one, you can see that we have now a lot of things going on. So we have access to all the materials. So I could even swap out the materials on a frame-by-frame base if I want to. So if you want to make material animations and they should be swapped out, no problem. This is how you can do this here. We have a lot of other things. Here, for example, is that cast shadows. Do you want this to be on and off during cinematic? Is it hidden in game? Should it receive decals, the things that I talked about earlier? Should it receive them at all or not? All of this can be animated. So you have a ton of options. Most of them you will probably never need, but it's very amazing that you're basically now equipped to animate anything that you want. And then of course, the most important thing, if you go here to a cinematic, you can drag a camera actor in place. And you can see here's our camera. You also see that I already have quite a lot of cameras flying around here because I already made a cinematic, obviously. But with this camera, you can see here also I get a thumbnail of how this camera, what the camera is seeing right now. So we can also, just as with the box, add this camera to the sequencer. And then if I push this little icon here, I'm now looking through the camera and I can now control the camera basically. And we can put it into a position where we want, where we think it makes sense. And if I press the G key on the keyboard, we hide all the helpers. So now it's much easier to see. And if we go for maybe something like this, this could be an interesting frame, for example, could be a nice shot. So when we have the camera, we also have the aperture and the focus distance. So if I change the focus distance, you can see that the depth of field starts to do something. So for example, we could say that we want to have the screen here in focus. So we set a keyframe here, and then we move forward in time a little bit and shift the focus to the background elements. And now we have like a focus pull basically animated in the Unreal Engine sequencer. And it's technically as simple as that. It's very straightforward. It gives you a little bit of options at first, and you can expand it to add more and more and more data to this one. So this way you can animate lights, you can animate materials, objects, properties, everything, particles, whatever you want, So there's really no limitation for what you want to do. And now let's take a look at the actual sequence that we have set up here. Here you can see the actual cinematic from the Dreamworld cinematic, and this part of course only includes the scenes for the underwater base. For the actual Dreamworld part, we're gonna take a look in a couple of minutes. And when I again push this camera symbol, we start to see what the cameras are seeing. And you can also see that we have different cuts here now already working. So if I just scrub through the timeline, you can see the cuts doing the things, and you see the characters doing the performance. This pretty much starts to look like a thing from the original video that you saw in the beginning. And here you see it's a little bit more complex, but it was very easy to handle in a way that we have here for Luna's body, for example. We see we only have one animation clip. So when this clip is quite a bit of time long here. So I think this is looks like almost like 3,000 frames. And this is basically the entire animation that we received from the motion capture shot. So we put this entire thing in here and just let it play. Same with Zoe's body, it's the same principle, just one animation clip for the entire thing. And as I said, the faces are also treated as a unique character. So you see that the face is kind of detached here. It's the own object. And also the face got an animation track for the position and the rotation of where the head is, and also the facial animation, everything for the eyes and the mouth and all of the facial expressions. Exactly the same for Zoe, same process. And that's basically the easy setup if you're coming back with motion capture and you have things recorded and it's looking quite good. Then we can basically double click on this shot that we're playing, as this gets us one layer deeper inside the cinematic. And in this one, we basically animated all the lights and the camera cuts. So we did it a bit quick and dirty here. So we've put all the cameras here, and you can see them here in the scene. You see that we have here a camera and there, and they're like pretty much cameras flying around everywhere. And all these cameras are animated in sequencer, as well as the lights. And you also see that we have here quite a bit of lights that doesn't seem to do much. They seem to be having a very small range. This one may be a little bit bigger, but they're all floating around randomly in space. And I'm going to show what they do in a moment. But when you go here again into the cuts, you see how these cuts are working. And each time this cut happens, you see it directly swapping here in this viewport. We could have given them a bit proper names, as they just called Cine Camera Actor 6 and 1 and 2 and whatnot. If you're a bigger production with multiple people, it's highly advised to make the naming much better than we did here. So all the animations receive all the cameras receive the animations, simply animated here in Unreal Engine. And we animated the focus distance that I showed you just a minute ago, and all these other elements. So you see here this camera has a bit of more keyframes, and sometimes a bit of camera shake that we're also using. But that's technically it. So this is kind of a simple setup here. And this just got repeated until you're happy with all the shots and the cuts. And what the next thing is doing is the actual lighting of the entire scene, as we are doing a thing called shot-based lighting. With shot-based lighting, you have the ability to basically change the light on a cut-by-cut basis. And this means, if we look through these cuts here, it basically means that the light is right now changing in every cut. But you might think, well, I don't see anything. And this is exactly the goal. So it allows you to polish the shot as nicely as possible by adjusting the lights so that they shine on the characters as best as possible. And it's very often, it's just like a real movie with a real set. You also have to make sure that all the lights that you put there are, selling the message that you want to tell, as light always also tells a story basically for the characters. So, but what you don't want is that you see that the light is suddenly changing for every new cut. And when you look through this here, it looks like the light is kind of always the same, which is the goal. But when we look at this from outside, so not through the cameras, we see that the light is actually moving quite a lot here. Each different cut, you see how the reflections in the light are wandering around. And so this looks kind of weird here in this view, but as I said, everything is of course adjusted that it's not obvious in the final shot. And this of course brings me back to the thing from the very beginning where I said just make sure everything looks good for the shot only, and whatever happens somewhere out here doesn't matter. And this is the same principle, so we made sure that this character gets a bit more of a rim light here, that we have some reflections on the ground. But it might be annoying in the next cut if we zoom on the other character that there's too much light in the face. So we need to move the light away and put it somewhere else. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And here in this shot, for example, where she has this very nice illumination on the face. When we look at here, I think I have somewhere a light standing, like I think it's this one. If I just disable it, look how much light we're losing. So this would be the default light setup, but just for this particular cut here, I have this extra light. If I enable it again, it's exactly directed at her face, and nothing more. That's why it has quite a short reach. I didn't need it on the ground. I don't need it on the other character. I just need to light her face this way. So this light is only basically working the magic for this cut, and then in the other one it's gone again. We don't need it. And for another cut, I might bring it up again and change the position slightly if I need to. Of course, we can also change the colors and intensity and whatnot. This is all animated, so it will always look as good as possible, only for this cut. And this is what shot-based lighting is doing, and why it's so important that you always have the right amount of lights that you want in your scene, and everything looks as good as possible. Here we are now in the Dreamworld, and you can instantly see the different tone of colors, like it's more orange, and obviously it's much more creepy looking. So the Dreamworld was always designed to be more of a surreal place, and it's quite inspired by the Polish painter Beksinski. And we also used quite a lot of the marketplace assets for this one. So we used, I think, a lot of the free Megascan rocks and whatnot, and we found some skulls and some other elements that where we adjusted the colors to match everything nicely together, adjusted the lighting, and to bring this atmosphere kind of to life here. So, and when we just move here a little bit, you can see, if you remember this shot from the video with these kind of corpses here, this is where it was done. And additionally to the assets, we also used projected decals. So it's similar to what we use for the other assets, but these ones are projected, meaning we can move them in real time here up and down and change the look of these assets so that they don't look so much like copy paste, basically. So we have quite a lot of these leaking rust decals that we just project onto these characters, and then each one gets a bit more of their own unique look, and it gives some really creepy and nice effects here, like some wound and like some mud on top of this. And this was looking very nicely scary and creepy. So this is what we were going for. But when you zoom out on this entire level, you start realizing that this level looks really, really weird. And this doesn't look like a level that is doing any good, basically, or that's useful. But when you look closer, you start realizing maybe what the purpose is of this one. So I basically treated this entire level as one big set piece that has multiple small areas where other set pieces are located. So technically, each cut could have been a different level, of course, with its own lighting and its own assets and its own terrain and whatnot. But for me, it was easier to just put everything on one level and then to be able to make my camera cuts kind of quickly in the same world. So when we go here, for example, this looks really weird. And you think, what is this good for? But once you have found your camera position that we were using, all on a sudden, it starts to look like a pretty cool set. And now it looks like part of a bigger world that has been very well defined, and it looks interesting. But again, once you zoom out, everything breaks completely and falls apart. So it's almost like an optical illusion, it only looks good from one camera angle. So we have multiple of these sets, and I think this is the set that we used for this tree with this reflection here. And here are these zombie corpses. And what is this? Here's the area from the final shot. Here we have Zoe's look in the Dreamworld, so she looks slightly different in the Dreamworld. And this is this thing from the ending shot. All of a sudden, again, looks like a very cool scene. When you look at it from here, you think, what is this? Doesn't look like it's doing anything good. So everything is 100% only adjusted for the specific shots. And as I said, we have a couple of more of those. I think we even had more scenes than ended up in the actual trailer. So we see here, this was also an interesting idea that we had, but I think I didn't use this one. Here is this other character, this gigantic, creepy, dead horse that walks around. Here another one. Just find the right kind of camera, and then it starts to look like the real scene. So this is what this level is meant for. And if we jump into the sequence, which I think is here, Dreamworld, if we just go into the master, and we basically see here all the different cuts and shots that we have. So if I again click on the camera symbol and look through the cameras, now we see the first or the first shot. So here's exactly what we had with the flies and the skulls and whatnot. And it looks all very detailed in like a complex world, but now, as you know, it's just a small set piece that we were using only for this shot. Everything else around it looks kind of horrible. Here as well, you see how this is all looking very nice and adjusted only specifically for this shot. Even this tiny light here, you can see the light here. I have a very unique light, and this light has a very small radius and is shooting directly onto this character, and you see how much effect it has. If I don't use it, it looks kind of boring and flat, but just this light, this is kind of the key light that sells this shot. Another thing we were doing is actually when you go out here, you see that there is actually a weird structure of the skeletons behind this guy, and when I go into the shot before, you see that they are not here. So what's happening here? I really wanted to make this shot look cool with this kind of V-shaped composition and this kind of hands reaching kind of to the skull, and he has the hands kind of crossed over his chest. But I couldn't really do this shot in this angle here, like it wasn't really working. So what I was doing is placing additional of these corpses just in a weird position behind him. But again, when I look through the camera, all of these characters are having exactly the placement that I wanted. So, and actually when I go in the shot before, these characters are all somewhere floating around the terrain. And here in this cut, they are animated that they should all find their position again here with this light. And all of a sudden, this shot looks cool. And this shot, again, looks also nice, but it's, again, specifically made with the lighting and the sun direction specifically for this shot. And you see here the next cut already, the sun is changing, even the clouds are changing, the skeleton corpses are changing, everything on this shot-by-shot lighting. And this is true for everything. So when I just go through here, you see how much the fog and the light and the sky, it's all completely changing on this shot-by-shot base. And again, if I go through the cameras, and here's the other scene from the beginning, and here's this creature walking with the sun coming up, and it looks super cool. I know it looks very creepy and atmospheric with the fog. And then we zoom out, we realize this looks horrible, So again, all just adjusted for this cut. And this is of course true for all the other ones. I think this one I didn't use at all, I think. So I had made a couple of more of these, and as I said, some of them were just not used. And here we have Zoe basically waking up, so this was the final shot. And this was pretty cool looking with the light and this little embers flying around here. And this is where she gets up, looks around. This is also motion capture, by the way. We also shot this one with the actress. It was very simple, obviously. She's just basically standing up, looking at the environment. And then we have the reverse shot, basically, and we start quite early here. We have this entire thing, and I just cut it away in the edit later on. And and then you see also how whenever you're done shooting motion capture, the characters usually go back into T-pose, So I basically did the cut exactly when I ran out of footage, So, and by the way, the final edit was done using DaVinci Resolve. I could have done everything in Unreal Engine, of course, but to me it was more convenient to go into an editing software. You can, of course, use any edit software that you want. Doesn't matter, but my preference is always DaVinci Resolve. So this is where I did additional color grading and, the final edit basically for this entire sequence. Here's another shot, and here's this one. And this one. So the very, very last thing that I did was actually, I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we see this giant creature like stomp through this environment. And it was, I think, one of my last ideas that I had, and it turned out to be the first shot of the kind of actual cinematic. So let's talk about ray tracing for a moment. And you maybe have heard this word before, as it's kind of also a new buzzwords in the latest games, that ray tracing basically gives you better graphics. But yeah, it's kind of essential to understand what ray tracing is actually really doing and how it could help your production. And we used ray tracing in this Dreamworld cinematics. So I just want to give you on a quick little example what ray tracing actually is and yeah, what makes it useful. So first of all, ray tracing here in Unreal Engine 4 needs an RTX card, and so I'm using, as I said, the 3090. I think it's also possible on a GTX 1080, but it's definitely recommended to have one of the newer RTX cards, as the ray tracing algorithm here is using the hardware to actually calculate the light. And that's basically what it's doing. So ray tracing means obviously it traces the rays, and this is used for various things. And what I'm using it for is for better shadows and for better reflections, and then also for a thing called global illumination. And let's have a look at these things, what they're doing. So here in the scene, you can see it's very simple. I have a box on a plane, and I have one light that is casting a shadow from this box. And you can see this is very, very typical game looking. So this shadow from this box is super sharp, and it doesn't look wrong or anything like it. It's just that it looks kind of unnatural, as in reality it's very hard to find shadows like this from a light source. So, and this is basically all the default shadows that Unreal Engine is doing without ray tracing. So, but usually when you have like a light source which is somewhat casting the shadows or emitting the light from a sphere, like from a light bulb, the shadows would be starting sharp at the start and then get softer and softer and softer the further they get away from the object. But it's not happening here. And this is one of the limitations from obviously real-time engines, because making the softer shadow is more expensive to render, meaning your performance of your real-time speed will go down, or your frames per second, if you want to call it like this. So now I have ray tracing enabled, and what I can do, you see here on this properties for this light that the actual source radius from this light is at 0, meaning it's coming from a perfect point, which is something you also don't find in reality. And when I increase the radius of this light, you see that this shadows start to get softer. And this is getting softer and softer and softer. And this is now looking already, although it's such a simple scene, it looks so much better, right? It looks so much more like something that you would expect from an offline rendering scene to happen. So if I bring this down a little bit again, you can see it quite a bit better. But you also see that this kind of flickering starts to happen. And if you know a little bit of offline rendering, it's exactly the same, meaning that this effect is using samples for rendering. And the more samples you use, the more accurate this shadow will be, but also your frames per second or your performance from your viewport here will go down. So if we scroll down here a little bit, we have samples per pixel, and right now it's using 1, which is obviously the minimum. So if I set this to 4, you can see that the flickering has been quite reduced. If I set it to 8, to like 16, the flickering is pretty much gone. And now we have a very, very nice, oops, my viewport speeds a bit fast here. Now we have a really nice looking shadow here. And even if we make this even smoother, here with the source radius, the shadow kind of stays stable, but very high values causing a bit of flickering again, meaning we maybe have to increase the samples even more. No problem for this scene, as we just have a little box and one light source, it's really not complicated. But if you imagine if you have thousands of objects and multiple light sources and they all are casting the soft shadows, you can imagine that your actual performance will go down quite a bit. So as this obviously is all running very smoothly, bigger scenes might have a problem. So a recommendation is always just use it wisely. Do not have every light basically casting soft shadows and only your main key lights basically, as the soft shadows will help to enhance your realism quite a bit. The next thing is the actual reflections. And when you give this material here, for example, let's give it a chrome material. So I have here metal chrome, and I just assign this here. You see that we see the reflection of this box. There's nothing special with it. Also, we see that the light source is being reflected inside the surface as well. But right now we're using the default option for reflection, which is screen space. And this means Unreal Engine reflects everything that is on the screen. It's working differently for lights, however, but when you look at the box and I zoom closer on the box, you start to see that the reflection of the box starts to eat itself away until it kind of disappears. So this is obviously not really normal for a reflection for this to happen. And that's happening because of the screen space. So obviously now the box disappears from the screen here at the very top, and so it's unable to reflect it properly. And this is something that ray tracing helps you as well with. So if I go to my settings here, can set the reflection, we can set it to ray tracing. And you can see it looks already slightly different and slightly better, but I can now zoom onto this box and you see that the reflection stays consistent throughout. So this is one of the main benefits for ray tracing reflections. It's not screen spaced. Everything is being reflected accurately. This effect is also a bit more expensive to render. So just with the shadows, just keep in mind that enabling all these effects will reduce your frames per second, which is of course especially important for games. If you're making a cinematic, which you in the end render out anyways, not that important, but if you constantly work in 1 frame per second, it takes out quite a bit of fun of working on these cinematics. Another thing, I just set it back to screen space. Another thing that we can do with ray tracing, I just assign the plastic back to the floor here, is the actual global illumination. And what this is doing, if I enable this, it basically tells the light to hit a surface and then take a bit of the energy with it, bounce it onto a next surface, and then basically illuminate the surface indirectly. So the global illumination also often is called indirect illumination, as right now you see the surface is pretty much completely black. We just have a tiny bit of the screen space reflection here, but technically this is completely dark. So if I enable the global illumination, you start to see that this box now gets illuminated, and all of a sudden, coming back to the original thing, this is such a simple scene, but now it looks much more realistic, and also much more that you would think or that you would assume has been done by an offline render engine. And again, you see a lot of this flickering here, and it's the same principle. It wants to use samples. So the more samples we use, the better it will kind of look, And there's even more of these samples available in terms of noise reduction, which is having like an AI-driven noise reduction to remove this kind of noise out of your scene. So there are different ways to optimize this, and but basically this is what the global illumination is doing. It helps you to really get this realistic light bounces. And of course, if I give this object, for example, here, the yellow plastic, you will see that all of a sudden these areas have become a little bit more yellow. And this is because the information from this color will be taken into consideration and then being bounced around. This is why this area now gets a little bit more yellowish. And every light has basically also a parameter for the intensity, which is set by default to 1. And if you say like we want the indirect lighting even stronger, you can totally exaggerate this thing. Of course, it makes the flickering much more visible. So as a result, I would now again need to increase the sample count to make this thing look really nice and proper. Additionally, there's also a path tracer available with ray tracing, which which renders the entire scene using a different algorithm, which is obviously called path tracing. And you can see that we also have some noise that starts to get slightly refined. But this is one of the most realistic and accurate render workflows. This is the path tracing. And you can also render your animations with path tracing, but keep in mind it takes a while. It brings you back kind of to the offline rendering days. You just need to invest a lot of samples and time to make the pictures really clean. But obviously the benefit is it is very, very accurate, and you can achieve very photorealistic results with this one. Something that is very hard to do without ray tracing and the default Unreal Engine tools. So that wraps it up for this presentation. I hope it was useful and you will learn something out of it, or you got inspired to actually start with cinematics using Unreal Engine. And if you're interested, I always highly recommend to go to the Epic website and of course download Unreal Engine 4 for free, or even Unreal Engine 5, the open beta. And then also check out the Epic Marketplace, where you can find a lot of assets for free. Obviously, you need a couple of assets in order to start working on a cinematic. So you can find the characters from the old Paragon game from Epic Games all for free. They come with animation clips. They look really awesome. You can just drag them into your scene. You can build an environment and just start learning and doing the basics. Start your first camera cuts, first lighting, and just experiment with the editing tools here, and just make the first small cinematic and build up from there. With this being said, thank you very much, and maybe see you soon.